What's up, my fellow Terrans? It's Alan, and we're going to be continuing on Chapter 5 in Grand Design. I have to say, Ruar, that was an impressive launch, remarked Jezri, unbuckling her harness. What kind of conversion did you hit? The space outside the window was a deep, inky black, occasionally disrupted by faint pulses of light streaming by the side of the ship. I don't think I've ever been this deep outside of, she trailed off, more massive ships at any rate. Ruar unjacked, panting, and stumbled for a second before shaking himself thoroughly. Looks like I blew past 50, he said, his exhaustion failing to keep a note of pride from his voice. Holy shit, Jezri said, eyes widening. Anything upwards of a 20-fold mass multiplier off a jump ramp was considered to be excellent. The artificially enhanced weight slinging smaller ships much deeper into hyperspace than they could penetrate unassisted. 50 plunged their small freighter well past those plebeian levels and into the true abyss, normally reserved for the mightiest of warships. Apparently Ruar's minor attack of smug was well warranted. Shrugged Ruar, rolling his head to the side. You should see it when I nail a jump with a full hold. Your full back all the way. Go so fast. Your full back all the way. Go so fast you wouldn't believe it. He looked at Jezri. Well, maybe you would. Jezri laughed. How long will the transit take at this depth? Ruar tapped a few console buttons. Well, we could probably cut it down to 2 hours or so, but it'd be a comfier exit if we came up near the end. 3 hours, maybe? She let out a low whistle. Those were world-class numbers. Truly something to brag about. Thanks, Ruar, she said. I'll let Anja and Kik know. The dog nodded, turning back to the console and twitching slightly as he reconnected. Jezri scrambled down the short stairs and back towards the med bay, where she found Anja helping Kik sit up on the bay's medical bed. Blue and white nano wraps bound the top of Kik's head like a bizarre turban covering the site of his injury. He looked shaky but awake and alert. Madam Jezri, he clattered, nodding at her. I think I recall a jump as I was waking up. Are we safely away? Jezri nodded, sitting on the edge of his bed. Yeah, you've got one hell of a pilot. She shot a glance at Anja. Ruar says we'll be at Harsi in 3 hours, even with a soft drop. Anja hung up the diagnostic scanner with a suitably impressed look while her patient preened from the bed. Oh, fuck. Yes, Mr. Ruar is quite the talent, he said. I actually only hired him for his artificer skills, so finding out he could pilot was a happy surprise. Don't tell him this, but he could probably make much more money as a pilot with his gifts. Anja laughed. Jezri chuckled at the hit on the upper arm with her fist. Oh, don't sell yourself short, teased Jezri. I have a feeling you two will be clearing up after we part ways. Kik and Anja gave her an inquiring look. Ruar and I had a talk as we were leaving, Jezri explained. Ruar feels that Harsi could be somewhat hazardous, but that the risk would be properly offset if we allocated residential access at a few seconds. God, it's a bit hot in my room. Okay. The hit peered at Jezri curiously, but Anja's eyes narrowed. May we speak a moment, sister? She said evenly, gesturing to the door of the med bay, sensing a stiffening A stiffening of the air in the room. Kedick eased himself up from the bed and rattled to the floor, testing his limbs. I do believe a walk would do me some good, so if you'll excuse me, he nodded gratefully towards the two women. Madam Jesri, Madam Anja, thank you for your care. They returned the gesture as he ambled out, then turned to face each other as Anja slapped the door controls. Almost before it had hissed closed, the warmth had fled from her face. Sister, I do wish you'd consult with me before making promises like that, she said. I don't dislike the bug and the dog, but giving them real access sits poorly with me. Jesri rolled her eyes, easing herself up from the bed. Don't start with that, she scolded. You had nothing to say when I gave guest rights to the UN just now. Anja shook her head. That was teaching a lesson. With rights had been given away long ago. You're proposing to barter out our inheritance to pay fair, sister. What I'm proposing, sister, is proper compensation. You bullied poor Kik into letting us on board in the first place. At which point, an armed mob targeting us attacked their home and their livelihood. Kik almost died in the escape, and without Ruar, we would be arriving at Harsi days from now instead of hours. Jesri folded her arms across her chest and glared at Anja. They've been nothing but gracious, and we've been a calamity for them. Anja stalked over to Jesri and stuck a finger against her breastbone. Money, she said, japping with each syllable. I don't dispute that we've incurred a debt, but that's what money exists to repay. Neither of us is destitute. Jesri snorted at the understatement. For people their age, compound interest made the entire game somewhat unfair. Ruar didn't ask for money, she retorted. He asked for a chance to earn it. They're locksmiths, Anja. They have more use for this than anyone. This failed to mollify Anja, who spun away from Jesri with a glowering look. Locksmiths? She growled. It's bad enough to give rights to strangers, but vandals and robbers besides. They're just opening doors, shouted Jesri. If you think it's so wrong to do it their way, you should be glad to give them an alternative. She forced herself to take a breath. We've been around a long time, and we'll die eventually. Should humanity's work help the future or stand apart from it? What do you want Earth's legacy to be? Anja met her gaze unblinkingly. Victory, she said. We'll finish what we started. Jesri laughed unkindly. Victory for who? For Earth? There's no victory left there. We lost that battle no matter what you think we can do for the war. We click our heels together and shout Terra Invicta until the stars burn cold, and that doesn't make it any less of a lie. And just slapped Jesri across the face, her eyes furious and blazing. Jesri took the blow without attempting to dodge, but caught Anja's wrist before she could withdraw her arm. If you fight, you're fighting for the sake now, she said, her face stinging. Nobody else is left. Anja tore her hand away and stormed out, leaving Jesri alone in the med bay. She sat down on the bed again, rubbing her cheek. After several long minutes, she sighed, hauled herself up. She felt every bit of her age. Toggling the lights, she sealed the bay shut and moved off to find where her wayward sister had gone. Ruar and Kedick sat on the bridge, watching the ripples of light drifting past the ship, cut awake through the midnight void of deep hyperspace. The ship was mostly silent as it cruised, which meant that the indistinct sounds of Jesri and Anja's altercation were hard to ignore. Kedick looked over to Ruar, chittering to himself. I've really done it this time, haven't I? He observed. The dog grinned at him toothedly. Captain, I don't believe either of us had the option to walk away from the moment they met us. Quietly being mediocre is off the table until they decide we're done. Kiddick got up to pace the length of the bridge, his arms rattling in consternation. Consternation. It's a new word for me. I'm not one for politics or conflict. Quietly being mediocre was my best quality. Ruar chuffed laughter at him. Don't be modest, Captain. You're not like making a splash, but you always walk away with your due. Of course, he retorted, Kiddick. Because I know when to walk away. Now the exit is closed off, and I can't see the top or bottom of this. Ruar contemplated his words and found that he didn't have a good response. The two of them sat silently on the bridge, waiting for the first stars to shine out of the void. The bridge was awash with light towards the end of the jump. Soap bubble fragments of a starscape sliding back and forth in a luminous shell as the freighter skipped along the thin boundaries of hyperspace. Jezri poked her head in from the corridor, then ambled up to stand beside the crew. She flashed Kiddick a friendly smile when he turned his head. Looks like we're almost out, huh? He nodded, chirping. We're in the final run-up. You should watch Madame Jezri and Mr. Ruar is something of an artist in this regard. Okay. Ruar bared his teeth in a grin, but said nothing. His muscles twitched sporadically as his eyes stared ahead, unfocused. Moving fast in hyperspace was easy, but moving slow required much finer control. The window to drop out within easy reach of their destination would span only a fraction of a second. Missing the window would drop them well outside the station's entry envelope, after which they'd face the prospect of a long, slow burn to get back into position for docking. The timbre of the ship's engines changed slightly, and Jezri reached out to grab a chair. Kiddick chittered at her, standing unsupported next to Ruar. Here we go, he said, leaning towards the viewports. The liquid lines of starlight brightened. The liquid lines of starlight brightened, flowed together, then snapped back to a stable star field around the ship. Jezri felt a brief shudder in the decking, then stillness. Wisps of glowing light curled away from the hull and drifted past the viewports, dispersing to show the massive expanse of a transit station hanging close ahead of him. Ruar let all of his breath out in a whoosh, slumping over sideways on the decking. Okay, short nap, he said, tongue lolling out of his mouth. Being this good is fucking exhausting. Jezri clapped her hands together. That was spot on, and the smoother exit I've had on any ship this size. Most of the old Navy pilots would just try to shake up the ground pounders if they got the chance. Ruar stretched his head. Lucky for you, I'm not a Navy pilot then. She peered through the viewport at the station, hanging silently against the stars. A thin crescent of light illuminating the near edge where the local stars shone. She peered through the viewport at the station, hanging silently against the stars. A thin crescent of light illuminating the edge where the local star shone weakly against the gray hull. No telltale flashes or streaks of engine light played around the docks, and large swaths of the shadowed hull seemed darker than they should be. She frowned. Seems pretty quiet over there, she muttered, scrolling through the data display. Ruar hauled himself to his feet with a grunt and then turned his head towards the station. You're not wrong, he said, eyes darting rapidly. Thermals are way below average, and I don't read any recent drive trails. If people do live here, they're not up to much. If I didn't know better, I'd say that some of those near sections were unpowered. He turned to Jezri. I've never seen a transit station like this. I have, said Jezri. Reactor damage. The station is cutting power to non-essential systems in uninhabited sectors. Kiddick rattled his arms. How could something damage a transit station? He wondered, agitation creeping into his tone. The way they're built, that seems like it would be impossible. Jezri looked away, her eyes distant. Oh, it's possible. Excuse me. There was a long moment of silence, broken by Anja's arrival on the bridge. She wandered up to stand next to Jezri, who indicated the silent bulk of the station with a jerk of her chin. Anja frowned. That could complicate things, she said. We did not have any reports indicating that this station was one of the damaged ones. There are others? Asked Ruar, his ears twitching inquiringly. Anja gave him a pained look, and Jezri shook her head sadly. Most transit stations are like this, Jezri sighed. You just use the ones that survived. Right now there are around 200 active stations. Fewer, whispered Anja, cutting her off. 189 left. Ruar's ears flicked back. Wow. I'd considered myself well-traveled, having visited 50 or so. How many were there originally? Jezri closed her eyes. Thousands. Anja walked to stare out the viewport, turning her back on the group. Jezri looked at her, then turned back towards Ruar and Kiddick. We shouldn't sit exposed for too long. Can you see which parts of the docking ring still have power? Ruar nodded, and a displayed fair with a map of the station. Three bright arcs were highlighted in green across the perimeter. We can dock in any of these sections, I think. Based on our nav data, the old port operated out of this area here. A smaller segment of the green area turned blue. Jezri nodded, then pointed to a smaller arc several segments away. Let's dock here, she said. We're already on that side, and it's distant enough that we shouldn't run into anyone. The engines hummed as Ruar laid in a course. The ship slid noiselessly towards the cavernous docking bay, the wide rectangular edges growing to dwarf them as they passed through. The ship vibrated softly as they moved through the docking field into the bay's atmosphere. Light currents of wind buffeting the hull. Through the viewports, the slips bristled like a jagged row of needle teeth drawn with gray and white. Aside from them, the bay was deserted. Ruar sidled up to one of the slips and unjacked, stretching his legs. Okay, hard part's over, he grunted. Now we just need to deal with all of the crazed cannibal bandits on the spooky derelict station. Jezri laughed and shook her head. We're far enough away from the old port that I'm hoping we don't see anyone. We just need to head a short distance back from the docks to a data terminal. Then we can leave. You can stay on the ship with the captain. We shouldn't be gone for more than an hour. Ruar whined softly. I want to come, he muttered. Lifting an eyebrow, Jezri turned to face him. What about the spooky cannibal bandits, she asked with a grin. You said yourself they probably wouldn't be an issue, he retorted. Embarrassed. This place feels like a bad fucking idea, but I'm not such a tail tucker that I'd miss out seeing whatever magical ancient human tech you're about to mess with. Fair enough, said Jezri, but if you come along, you follow instructions. Your curiosity is secondary to our goal. Ruar sniffed. Which is? Jezri smiled wider. Primary. She turned to look at Anja. I'm going to grab a few things from my bag, then we can head out. 5 minutes later, the three of them stepped out onto the slip. The light breeze from the circulators rushed past them, the air neutral and dry. Ruar looked around nervously. The docking bay stretched spare and empty in all directions. The flat gray decking spotless and uncluttered. You know, this actually looks better than some of the ports I've been to. Anja's lips pressed together in a line. This is how they should all look, she said. Most of the ports are so dirty these days. Jezri turned back to Kiddick, who was standing in the hatch. Captain, keep an eye out on things from the ship. Don't open the hatch for anything but our return. The diminutive. I can't believe I have a hard time pronouncing that word. The diminutive. Why the fuck can I say this word? Diminutive. The diminutive hit nodded and chirped. Of course, Madam Jezri. He inclined his head to Anja and Ruar, then stepped back and toggled the hatch closed. It hissed shut, leaving them alone on the slip. Now then, said Anja brightly, shall we? She cocked her head for a moment, then nodded. The station responds properly when queried. You should register too once we're out of the slips. They trekked over to the nearest bay exit, then passed through into the corridor beyond. Jezri stretched her shoulders, then addressed the ship. Station Ariane, she said. Captain Jezri Tam, TNMC 3572 Sierra 4. Officer authorization, please. The speakers gave a crackling chirp in response. She turned to indicate Ruar. Register artifact Ruar with level 5 guest access and VIP protected status. Ruar shot her a grateful look, mouth lolling open, then ran over to a nearby supply closet. The door hissed open, revealing a bare room beyond with a few sealed yellow barrels. He yipped delightedly, spinning in place before retreating and letting the door close. The two women watched him as he approached the door again, causing it to slide open. This is a long chapter. Anja snorted. That door wasn't restricted to begin with, she said quietly. Shh, smirked Jezri. Let him have a bit of fun. She looked down the hall, pointing at a door. We're in the central dock for this segment, so the terminal should be straight back. Anja nodded, and the two started walking towards the door. Ruar tore himself away from the supply closet door and trotted along behind them, grinning like a maniac. Anja led the group through a twisting series of corridors for several minutes. They walked in silence, their footsteps echoing softly against the gentle hum of the station, and kicking up small puffs of dust from the deck. Yellow and red lichen speckled the walls, spreading from corners and seams. They stopped in front of a large door, dark gray with a thick frame. It opened silently when Anja stood in front of it, sliding up to reveal a small, dark room covered in displays and blinking lights. Well, here it is, she remarked brightly. The three entered, and both women took a console. After a few long minutes, Jezri frowned and looked up. I'm not finding anything. It should be in the trace logs, right? A message flashed red on her display. Excuse me. Casting bloody highlights across the room. The data is either corrupted or missing. I can't access it. Anja pursed her lips. Not missing, sister. She tapped a few times on her console, and a map of the station swam up on the display. The network links to the inner core appear to be down. Jezri groaned. Please don't say that, she groused, pushing away from her console. Ruar gave an inquisitive look, cocking his head. She's saying the dock terminals aren't going to work, she explained. We're going to have to access the data core directly from the inner ring. He perked up. We get to see the inner ring? Awesome. Anja smirked. Yes, and the transit pods won't be working. We get to walk there. Ruar's gaze flicked back and forth between them, his expression falling. How far is it? He asked. Jezri stood up. We'd better get back to the ship and let Kik know will be longer than expected. Anja nodded and followed her out of the terminal room. Ruar rushed after them. Hey, wait. Is it really far? Anja, Jezri, and Ruar approached a tall, heavy door at the end of a corridor. Anja stood in front of it, and a muffled whine of machinery sounded. It built and grew higher pitched. Then a jarring clunk set vibrations through the deck. The whine stopped. Damn it, said Jezri, closing her eyes. The three had been walking for 4 hours, and this was the 5th broken door they'd encountered. Every time they found one, they've been forced to backtrack to a different section to continue their inward progress. With a straight path, they could have been most of the way to the center by now. But their convoluted route and frequent interruptions meant that they were still stuck in the outer ring, nearly 2/3 of the way from the center. It would have been very convenient if it worked, grumbled Anja. The next door we could use to access the middle ring is a kilometer anti-spinward from here. Ruar made an exasperated whining noise. Are you sure it's not broken? He said, his exoskeleton unfolding to prod at the access panel. Anja rolled her eyes. You're the locksmith, you tell me. I don't deal with broken doors, Ruar muttered, the arms of his exoskeleton peeling back the panel cover and prodding at the electronics underneath. I'm not in the business of repairs. I deal with functional locked doors, hence locksmith. Anja leaned against the corridor and took a drink of water from her bag. Shouldn't a locksmith be making locks as well? If all you do is unlock the locks, it makes you more of a lockpick than a locksmith. Ruar shot her an annoyed look, with his arms kept. Ruar shot her an annoyed look, as his arms kept working inside the panel. I'm not a word historian or whatever. Etymologist, supplied Jezri. Anja frowned. Surely it's just a linguist. Whatever you like to call it, continued Ruar, glaring at her. I'm not in the business of opening locks. We can stand around talking about it, or we can. The door groaned and rose a meter, leaving a gap through which warm, humid air flowed softly. Ruar blinked. Huh, he said. Hey, the door's open. Jezri bent down to peer through the gap. Well, she said, striking her teeth. It's not pretty, but it's traversable. She peered at Ruar. What are the odds this door will chop me in half if I try to go under it? Ruar gave her an arch look. And now I'm a statistician. Is that how you say it? Statistician. Anja cocked her head. Actuary? Jezri shook her head. Okay, I deserve that. She slipped her bag under the door and then bent and passed through. Looks good over here. Come on through. Anja and Ruar slid through the gap to emerge on the far side of the door, looking down the long corridor. It was wide and tall, even taller than the residential corridors on the outer parts of the station. A slight curve caused the corridor to bend out of sight after several hundred meters, but it looked as though it ran for a very long way. The floor and walls were thickly covered in lichen, with mosses crowding the sides of the hallway in splotchy greens and browns. Anja beamed. Oh, good. This is one of the primary radial corridors. It will take us all the way across the middle ring, at which point we can transit to the inner ring and reach the core. Roar peered into the distance. How far is it across the middle ring? Jezri stretched her arms. 10 kilometers. Ready? She smirked at him and started walking. Anja on her heels. Ruar slumped. This is much less interesting than you made it sound on the ship. He shook himself and then padded off down the hall. The moss at the sides of the hallway thickened as they walked, and after the first kilometer, it formed a mossy bed of green stretching across the decking. Several centimeters of growth have accrued across the hall, supplemented in thicker areas by some sort of sparse grass. Anja bounced experimentally on the moss, standing on the ball of 1 foot. Okay. Springy, she noted. More comfortable to walk on. Jezri waved a hand at the ceiling. Yeah, but it means the environmental controls are messed up. The humidity is way above normal. Plus the green plants mean there was some sort of hydroponics breach. We're probably going to have issues further in. Roar sniffed the air. It does smell a bit mulchy from that direction. I don't think it's going to get any clearer as we keep going. Whew. Andra shrugged. Not much we can do about it. She squared her pack on her shoulders, and the group continued. The greenery intensified as they continued, clover spreading underfoot as ivy covered the walls in a thick mat of green. The plants clustered densely where the hallway lighting was strongest, making regular patches of high growth as they progressed. The hallway grew dimmer as the ivy climbed in great shaggy clumps around the light tracks at the top of the hall. It interspersed with hanging thorny vines. The two women were forced to dodge around clumps of thorn tendrils descending from the ceiling, stretching in verdant ropes over the passageway. Jezri pulled a long knife from her satchel. This is worse than I've ever seen it, she grumbled. She drew the knife slowly across the woody collection of vines, and they parted with no resistance. Ruar Ruar stared at the cleanly sliced vine, fascinated, then turned wide eyes to Jezri. Can I see that knife for a second? Jezri gave him a look, then kept on walking forward. Even with Jezri clearing the path, they made poor forward progress through the strangling vegetation. The air was hot and humid, and Anja was muttering under her breath. Ruar panted rapidly, his tongue hanging from his mouth, and small clinging seeds dotting his coat. They pressed forward for a couple of kilometers, cleaving a rough green tunnel through the undergrowth. They passed a hissing pipe at a junction, slick and green with huge mats of algae slumping around it. Anja smacked at it. There it is, she complained. One stupid pipe spraying excess moisture around for a few thousand years, and you have a jungle in the hallway. Roar stared at the tiny trickle of water from the pipe. Ruar stared at the tiny trickle of water from the pipe spraying out to coat a broad leaf with a sheen of beaded droplets. Seems like it's too small to cause all this. Jezri shrugged. It's not a significant leak, but time is the ultimate force multiplier. If the environmental humidity regulators are out, this is more than enough to throw a station's atmospheric mix out of balance. Ruar nodded, pondering. The group pressed forward, leaving the hissing pipe behind. The vegetation grew higher with every step, the smell of rotting plant matter thick in the air. After clearing through the particularly gnarled tangled, Jezri stumbled forward and found herself in an open stretch of hallway. The ghost of a grin rose to her lips, but died quickly as she looked farther down the corridor. "Ah, shit," she spat. "Guys, come up and look at this." Anja and Ruar walked through the hole. Anja and Ruar walked through the hole she had cut in the greenery and looked ahead. The hallway ahead of them was dim and murky. The plants along it brown and stunted. None of the wall lights were on past the point they had reached, and the far arc of the corridor was lost in shadow. Ruar peered into the darkness. "How long do you suppose this goes on for?" she asked. Anja shrugged. "Could be a few hundred meters. Could be several kilometers. Hard to say, but it should not extend to the inner ring unless there are unrelated problems with that grid as well." "Great," Jezri sighed. "Now it's dark." She reached into her satchel and grabbed a small round ball of metal, which she tossed into the air. It floated up to hover over her head and began shining softly, illuminating the hallway with a dim amber glow. She turned to Ruar, who was staring at the light intently. "No," she said. Ruar pouted. "I didn't say anything." "Mm-hmm," replied Jezri, adjusting her satchel as she peered further ahead. "My mistake." She began moving forward again, the ball of light trailing along above her head. Anja and Ruar followed on her heels, casting the dying plants into shadow. Together, the three walked into the darkness. And that's chapter 6.